Okay. We'd like to welcome everybody to the celebration of life for Scott Elijah Durfey. We are going to start off with, the family has requested a moment of reflection and remembrance. So we're going to start off with taking just a moment to reflect, and I'll come up when we're finished with that. Okay, so we are going to start off with a reading of Scott's favorite quote. Following that, we will have a couple of speakers. We are going to start off with Jared Daniel. He will be followed by Michael Murphy, who will be followed by Michael Durfey. After that, we'll have Brady Argyle, Jim Tolbert, and we will wrap up with Brian Jensen. We'll go to that point. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. This was Scott's favorite poem by Baxter Black. Your sadness pains me deeply, and I know you all miss this man. But it's true what you've been hearing. Cowboy heaven is a real place, and there's no small consolation. You should use that fact to face. The emptiness his parting left that seeps into your bones and draws you on to an easier pain, for he is not alone. You see, all his friends are up here, and all his loved ones too, 'cause it wouldn't be heaven without each one of you. And heaven for a cowboy is just what you might expect. It's horses that need turning up and heifers that need to be checked. It's long rides with a purpose and a code that lights the way, and a satisfying reason to get up every day. It's the ranch he's always dreamed of and never knew he'd find. And if you think about it, you can see it in your mind. Him leaning in the saddle with his old hat on his head, contentment set upon his face like a blanket on a bed. The leather cracks a little as he shifts there in the seat. The bit chains give a jingle, his pony switches feet. And you somehow get the feeling that he's sitting on a throne, just gazing out on paradise like it was his very own. I promise you, he's happy to know you can't pretend, and glad he made the journey it's hard to comprehend. The earthly way to look at things can never satisfy your lack of understanding, for the answer is why. So I offer this small comfort to put your grief at rest. I only take the top hands 'cause my crew's the very best. To friends and next to kin, but I need one more cowboy, and Scotty fits right in.
So I'm a little bit of a hot mess right now, so I'm gonna wear my glasses. I've been asked for days, what are you gonna say, what are you gonna say? I still don't know what I'm gonna say yet. So I decided to just kind of talk about, like 15 minutes ago, how I met Scott, and I had one stipulation was it couldn't be inappropriate. So that really like hardened my view of stories I was going to tell. So I met Scott when I was working at the hospital, and he's this cop coming in, bringing, bad guys in to get a medical clearance, and we kind of hit it off because he rode bullet bikes and I rode bullet bikes, and so when I started thinking about that, I was like, I'll tell a story about when I got pulled over in Laverkin for doing like 100 up the hills by Laverkin PD, and I was like, that's probably inappropriate. And then I was like, I'll tell a story about us riding from the port of entry to Mesquite in like 20 minutes. I was like, okay, that's inappropriate. And so I just kept thinking about like all our life, and then I became a police officer, and we gave up boat bikes for a long time, and we started boating. So I was like, I'll tell the story of when we were horse playing, and I fell off the boat, and the boat cleat lodged into my chest while we were moving. I was like, well, that's not the greatest story. And then I was thinking, we go to Lake Powell all the time. I was thinking, I'll tell a story about we almost sank his boat, but the details is not appropriate. So I just kept thinking, I'm like, I don't know, like 99% of my stories are not appropriate for the setting, I guess. So I'll tell a story with, it was me, Scott, and Mary. And Scott's like, I broke this horse. I want to take you and Mary on a horse ride. And I've lived out of state now for a while, so I come down, and Scott does all the work, loads up all the horses, and we go to the place. And I'm like, man, this horse doesn't look too friendly. He's like, no, I broke it personally. It's good. And I'm like, okay, I'll trust you. So I walk up to the horse, and the horse like flinches. I'm like, man, I don't know about this. Like, you sure? Like, this horse seems very skittish. I swear, you're good. I broke it personally. How long ago did you break it? It's been a while, man. It's been a while. You're good. So we load up, and I don't even remember where we were at. We're up by Dammer Valley or somewhere up there, and I get on this horse, and it's twitching, and like we're not connecting. We're not vibing, me and this horse. And I'm still like, Scott, you okay? You sure? Like, I'm good? Like, I don't ride horses. I'm a city slicker, okay? Like, I like horses, but it's not my jam. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to trust you. We're going. And sure as shit, we get, I don't know, like 100 yards down the freaking trail. My horse we're in the back. I'm in the back. My horse freaks out on something, and it just starts sprinting, made its own trail, past Mary, past Scott. And mind you, I don't ride horses, so Scott's like, pull the reins. Lesson learned, pull the reins one way or the other. You don't pull them back. So I just heard pull the reins, and what do? I pull them back, and that freaking horse reared up, and then it shot its ass up, and then it reared up, and it sent me flying, and like I damn near broke a hip. I had to limp back. Scott had to go do cowboy stuff and like catch the horse. So that's my most appropriate story that I could tell you guys. But all seriousness, it's pretty unfortunate that he's not here with us today. Yeah, next. Yeah, I'm not sure if everybody knows me, but I'm Mike. Known Scott about, I guess about 12 years. Been riding with him for about 7, and I'm the other half of Daniel. I did break a hip. So I'm kind of the special needs guy, and Scott was kind of my savior with my buddy Jim. So some of our time with Scott, I remember the calls, and he'd call, "What you doing?" "Oh, sitting here watching some Hallmark, eating a bowl of ice cream," or whatever it be. "What are you doing?" He'd say, "Well, guess what I did today?" It's like, "Oh God, Scott, really? How many this time?" And he'd go off and 1, 2, 3 horses, and it's like, "Now what are you gonna do?" "So I'm gonna break them and get rid of them and flip them." So Scott always had that thing with him: how fast can I get a horse? How fast can I break it, ride it, and get rid of it, or trade it off for a new one? Always, 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 always. He just had that demeanor to him. I sit here today, and the one thing we all have in common is Scott. And if I was to ask each and every one of you today, what's the one thing you remember? It would be his smile. I don't care who you are, Scott always had a smile. Always. And I'll go into a couple of quick stories. Scott calls me one day and he says, I put an ad in my Facebook page, and I'm going to bring in some horses for 30 days and ride them for people. And these are not necessarily new horses, but horses that have been rode or need to be rode. Scott had no fear, absolutely zero. And so he calls me one day and he says, "You up for a ride?" And I said, "I'm always up for a ride." And he says, "How about this weekend?" I said, "All right." So I called my other buddy Jim and says, "Scott wants to go for a ride. You up?" He says, "Yeah." "So what time?" I says, I know, we'll go try to get him to go early in the morning. I don't know that Scott was really a morning rider. He spent most of his time after 3 o'clock, and I spent most of my time before 8 o'clock a.m. So we go and we head out to Red Mountain, and he's got this new horse, and he's all saddled up, and me and my special needs, I'm kind of slow and kind of meticulous about how I do things, and I go about it, and we get ready, and Scott says, "I think I'm ready." I says, "All right, what do you want to do?" And he goes, "So I think I'm going to walk him first." I said, "All right, that's fair enough." So we go, and we cross the gate, and we go, and Scott's got this pair of boots on, and those that have ever rode with Scott or know Scott has these pair of boots that he got from his grandfather. And they were holier than the Bible. Literally. If you would have taken him to a shoe shop, the guy would have just given you a new pair of boots and said, "That's the best I can do for you." We go down this trail, and it's pretty sandy, and I'm working up a sweat just watching him walk. And every time he'd pick his foot up, the sand would roll out each side of his boot. And we get, 20, 30 yards down the trail, and Scott says, "All right." He says, "I think I'm ready." "Sure?" "Yep." "All right." So he gets on his horse, and he gets all settled in there, and gets his reins and whatnot, and kind of gets sat in his seat, and he says, "All right." He says, "Okay." Off we go. Cowboy down. Stop. That horse made 3 steps. Up, down, up. And Scott was folded up like a cheap lawn chair off the side of the trail. He gets up, and the sand kind of just drains off him, and he kind of flaps his hat and whatnot. "You all right?" "Yeah." "Any stickers in you?" "No." "You're good?" "Yep." He straightens out the horse, and he grabs it and
whispers in his ear, and, well, what do you want to do? He says, I think we're going to walk for a little longer. I said, all right. So we went on down the trail. And we get down to the next gate, and Scott, he gets back up on the horse, and he says, what do you think I should do? And I says, well, just sit there for a minute. Just let the horse get used to you. He works in for a minute. You ready? Yep. We went off. Never another problem with the horse. So whatever Scott whispered in his ear worked. Don't know what it was, but it worked. Next one is a more current story. These are kind of, and it was more or less my issue, not his, but me and Scott and Jim kind of have our own little ways of riding. We don't necessarily like trails, but we ride them, but we also like to make our own, and we're always looking for new ones. And me and Jim had gone out a few weeks prior and to try to find this particular trail, and we ended up in the bottom of some damn canyon, and just, yeah, it was a long day. And the one horse, he really didn't care for water too much, but I'll tell you what, by the time we got back out of there, we couldn't get him out of the water. All he wanted to do was stomp and play in it. And we never did find the trail, so we get out of there, and a couple days later, Jim calls me up and he says, I think I found the trail. He jumped on his four-wheeler and he raced across the side of this mountain and damn near killed himself rolling the four-wheeler off the mountain, but he thought he found the trail. So we give Scott a call, and he says, I think we got this trail, and it goes from Enterprise over to the reservoir side. It's about 3.5, 4 miles, and it's not a bad trail once you find it. So he's, I want to say he was on Roxy that day, and we go out and you get up at the top of the saddle, and you open up a field gate there, and you go through, and once you get through, it's pretty much a straight shot. You don't have to worry about any more gates. And we get to the other side, and we have lunch, and we sit there and let the horses rest for a little bit, and we make our way back. Well, one thing with me, I always wear my chinks, always. I've ruined enough pairs of pants. I've sewn Scott's pants, his designer jeans, or whatever you want to call them, but they're his favorite pants, so we did have to curate those one day. So we get back, and we get to the gate, we open the gate, and we pass through it. And we're all standing there. Again, special needs here. For some reason, Lee Majors came out, and I got on that saddle, and I went right up over the top and off the other side, and you know that picture of the kid that's hanging on the little thing with his on the coat rack, and he can't get off? Well, I looked just like that kid, but I was upside down on the saddle horn, had caught the inside of my chink, and I was hanging upside down on my horse. Well, I got pretty long arms, and I was on my shortest horse, and yeah, I couldn't even reach the ground. And I'm trying to grab, and these guys are laughing and kind of chuckling. They look at me and they say, you need some help? And I says, yes I do. And it took the two of them, and they literally had to lift me up off the saddle horn to get me back upright in the saddle. And so I always appreciate Scott and his assistance in helping me out on well, those times of need. And last but not least was a more real recent ride, and I was fortunate enough to be able to finance one of Scott's horses that he had purchased. And he says, when you get ready to ride, he says, let me know, and he says, I'll ride her. He says, all right. So the very first time, Jackie had actually come with us, and we went out to a place that's called Nephi Wash, and we just did a real quick ride. It was a pretty easy ride, but we were actually able to see the wild Mustangs out there. One of the rides that I frequent quite often for just that reason. And then a couple weeks, a week or so later, me and Jim had gone and found another trail, and I told Scott I wanted to take him on this trail. And so I've got, my horses range from 2 years old to 30 years old. And I tell Scott, I says, let's go on this ride. And he says, all right. So I grab my old horse, and he grabs my mare, and we take off on this trail, and we head out, and we pack our lunch, and we make it to the other side of the trailhead. And he says, well, what's up there? And I says, I don't know. He says, well, let's go up there. So we head on up, and there's a road that goes up there, and this if you follow this road, it takes you down into Pine Park, but when you're on the trail, it takes you a lot further west than it does east. So you end up more toward Enterprise Reservoir and not Pine Park. So when we're up in this thing, we says, oh, we're just gonna take this trail, and we dive off the other side, and we follow this like Jeep trail down, and it falls, and it just ends up to be just a water trough. Somebody had, ranch or whatever, made a road just big enough to take down into the this area. And he says, well, let's just follow it. I said, the hell I am. I said, I ain't going further to a place I don't know where I'm coming out at. I know that way is where my truck is, and that way I don't. So my idea is go back that way, and let's get up on the high ground. Let's get our advantage. He says, well, I think I seen a trail over here. You think you seen a trail? Yeah, I think there's one right there. So we start up, and he says, right there. So I dive off, and we start down through the thing, and my hat comes off a half a dozen times through this, and Scott says, don't worry about it, I got it. And he bounces up. I mean, the guy's got more energy than the little, what is the little rotor, the little, I don't know, the little squirrel thing. You know, when he, I mean, the guy goes like crazy all the time. And, but he was always willing to jump off his horse and grab my hat, as is Jim, and there's plenty of those times, trust me. Anyway, we get up on this trail, and we get to a spot where it's ridge, and there's just a small opening, and he says, well, what do you think about just dropping off here? And I said, well, there's a fence right here, Scott, and if you drop off there, how are you going to get over the fence? Well, there might be a spot down there. Well, there might be, but is there? And where does that lead? It's pretty damn steep down there. I can't see the bottom of it. It echoes, so I know it's deep. He says, well, what do you suggest? I says, again, I suggest we go back that way. He says, all right. He says, but I think there's a trail on the other side of the fence. All right. So we go back up, and we go through the fence, and I says, where at, Scott? And he says, right here. I says, right here? He says, yep. I said, all right. Off I went. And I was going through the trees, and I got one hand like this, and I got one hand like this, and I'm doing one of these things trying to keep my face from being scratched off, and who knows where my hat went. And he said, that's all right, I got it. And I get up to where we were level from this side. Now I'm on this side of the fence, and he says, well, let's just drop off. And I says, well, I'll go a little ways, but I'm not going to go to the bottom, because I know if I go to the bottom, I've got to come back out. So I go ahead, and we march off, and we start side hilling, and we find these, finally starts opening up, and I can start seeing stuff, and he says, what do you think? And I says, well, I think here we can probably go down to the bottom, see if there's some water down there, get the horses some water. And we're talking, you know, we're probably 5-6 hours into a ride by now. And the breast collar is worn the hair off the mare, and my horse is all ganned up, you know, 30-year-old horse, and he marches. He had not given up. And we get to a spot, and we get the horses water, and he says, well, what do you think now? And I says, well, I can see a fence line, and this fence line goes up. I said, I'm going to stay on this side of it, and that's where I'm headed. He said, all right. So we get up there, and we get to the road. Perfect. What do you think, Scott? He says, well, let's go this way. And I says, Scott, do you understand that going that way is going to take you further away from where you want to be? Moral of the story is, if it's on your turf, never let Scott guide you, because he will put you in a hole. A couple things I want to say to the family. Mourn when you need to. Make peace where you have to. And live life like Scott would want you to. May his trails be long. Rest in peace, Scott.
Well, this is quite a tribute to Scott to see this kind of turnout. He had quite a personality, I know, and a lot of friends. So my brother Scott was 20 years and 11 days younger than I was. My folks had an original family of 5 children and basically had us raised and out of the home when they decided to have 2 more. I don't know why they decided to have 2 more, but I'm glad they did. When we moved back home, my wife Sharon and I, our oldest child, Shanda, was 2 years old, which was 4 years younger than Scott. And when we moved back, we were only a block away. And we spent 3 years that close to him. And then we moved to another location 5 miles away and was there the entire time they grew up. And so we had a lot of opportunity to enjoy their company, to get to know them. And in later years, I have some cherished moments of them as adults. We, as I say, as brothers, we were, I mean, even though we were brothers, we're not raised by the same parents. The parents that raised me and the older siblings would have kept a lot tighter rein on Cody and Scotty than the parents that raised them. But I think that would have been a good thing too. It would have helped it out quite a little bit. Cody and Scott, they were quite the interesting kids. They had a lot of energy, they had big imaginations, very creative, and they had times when they were pretty prone to mischief too. And anyway, I just remember as kids, they were always into building things. Every time I went over to the farm, there was all kinds of prototypes of little ideas and things that they'd built and put together, laying here and there. And one time they were into building shoes out of pond moss, and they came over to our place and brought a little ruler and got a measurement of Shanda's feet for a perfect fit. I also remember a time that they designed and constructed a tree house with an open fireplace. A great idea, and I think it would have caught on had the tree not caught on fire, and they ended up having to call the fire engines to put it out. They were also real big into hunting and trapping, and it seemed whatever critter they killed, they had to skin it. And I remember coon skin caps, bird mounts, porcupine rugs, and I'm pretty sure I remember a time when they tried to skin a skunk. I mean, not that I was there. And if I'm wrong, then they didn't really skin it. I'm sure they at least thought about it. And whatever they were doing, it seemed like there was a certain amount of danger involved in it. And I was pretty amazed that both of them made it to adulthood. Shortly after Scott passed away, we were down here and had lunch with a couple of our girls. And our oldest, Shanda, she was telling us a story that she remembered when she was about 5 years old. She was over to their place, and they had a bunch of friends over, and they were having battles with their BB guns. And I guess they were actually using BBs. And Scott got shot in the head, and he was bleeding. And my daughter Shanda, at 5 years, was understandably pretty upset about it. And so she took off to find an adult, and they realized what was going on, rounded her up, cornered her in the rock shop, and wouldn't let her go until she promised not to tell anybody. She was good to her word too, because that was the first time I heard this story. During this same conversation, Shanda was saying to us jokingly, why would responsible parents ever let their kid hang out with Cody and Scotty? And I had to tell her, well, back in the day, kids were expendable. And then I reminded her of a trip that we took when she was pretty young. I loaded the kids in my little truck, and back then we didn't wear seat belts. We traveled 3 hours to this remote location, and there I unloaded a rickety old bike that was semi-dependable, and I stuck my daughter Krista in the backpack. I think she's about 3 years old, and put Dallin and Shanda on the bike in front of me, and we drove 15 miles up this creek to the most remote place you could imagine. And what's even worse than that is I left Shanda to watch the other two while I hiked up on this big ledge where I could get a look around. Now, in today's world, that would probably be considered borderline child abuse, but back then that was perfectly acceptable, and the reason it was is because kids were expendable, and Scott grew up during that time, and I remember I think it was about a year later, we went up that he and my son Dallin and I went up into that same place, and Scott was about 13 years old, and he had his own motorcycle. We went up even beyond where I'd gone with my kids the previous year, and then we parked the bikes and we did some exploring up a canyon, a tributary canyon to this big canyon, and we got to a place that this ledge had caved off, this great big ledge of rock and dirt, and the creek coming down through had kind of made a cavern all the way through. And we were able to climb up through this cavern and make it clear up through. But this cavern was so long that in the middle it was almost completely dark. And that was a neat experience. And then when we headed back to camp, we startled a group of buffalo that had come into water on the creek. And those buffalo just busted and went in all directions, but this bull took off. He was running down in front of us, and we just followed after him because it's the direction we were going, and I was hoping to get around him. But he'd taken off at a fast run, and now all of a sudden he was kind of loping, and he was turning sideways and looking back at us. And I was thinking, that's cool. That's just neat to see that. And then my slow functioning brain kicks in, and I realized he's sizing us up and trying to decide whether he wants to turn and take on his challengers. And so all of a sudden, my thoughts came, well, if he does, I can veer off this way and avoid him. And then all of a sudden, panic set in because I realized Scott's coming up behind me on a bike. And so I was in this state of panic for a minute, and then I remembered kids are expendable. And of course, I don't really feel like kids are expendable, but I do feel like it was a different age back then. It seemed like a tougher life, and it just seemed like we were willing to take a few more risks in life. And I guess, like Mike Rowe said, safety third. But anyway, my kids, they wisened up pretty fast. They caught on to these long days, and pretty soon they just refused to go with me. But not Scott. He was always willing to go, and you could just beat him up, and he'd come right back for more. And we loved Scott a lot. He spent quite a bit of time at our place. Loved to have him around. He really liked our kids, and we enjoyed having him. It seemed like he was always a happy kid, always very kind, and just had a cute smile. It was nice to have him around. Our youngest daughter, Darcy, reminded us that Scott had a certain knack for showing up right after Sharon had made brownies. He always seemed to know, and we'd tease him about his great sense of smell, and he always took the ribbon well, and finally admitted to us that he had a bionic nose. Our son, Dallin, we asked him, is there any memories of Scott that really stand out for you? And he said, well, one thing I can tell you is every memory I have of Scott either involves a horse or a motorcycle. And that was very true about Scott, you know. From my earliest memory of Scott, he loved riding horses. We had a farm and a few cows that we ran on the mountain in the summer and the desert in the winter. And Scott was always, he loved to gather the cows and trail the cows, and I think it was because he was able to do it on the back of a horse. And if he wasn't helping at the farm, if he wasn't riding horses helping at the farm, he was just riding horses. And I don't think it was a coincidence that when he was growing up, all of his best friends were kids who also had horses. When Scott got a little older, he started to get into motorcycles a little more, and more specifically trials. And he spent quite a bit of time practicing, but he was kind of a natural on a motorcycle, and always did really well. I spent a lot of time on trials myself, getting me up and down trails, but there was never any finesse. But Scott, on the other hand, he was riding over old cars, impossible boulders, and about anything else that he could find to ride over. I remember a time when he was in high school, I took him and a friend of his for a motorcycle ride out on the mountain. And this trail we took was fairly tough, and there was a lot of down trees, some of them pretty big. And I was out in the lead, and when we came to the first big tree, I wheelied my bike up and kind of straddled my bike up on the log and lifted the bike, got it on the skid plate and pushed it on over a little bit till the back tire caught, helped hop us over to the other side. And, it wasn't a pretty sight, but I made it over pretty fast. I was feeling pretty good about myself, so I parked my bike and went back to help the youngsters. Well, one right after the other, they rode up, wheelied, just popped their front tire against that log and pulled the motorcycle, hopped it right up on back tire, right on the top of the log, and sat there balanced for a second and hopped it off on the other side. So as we continued around the mountain, they continued to humiliate me in a similar fashion. And it was humble pie for me. But when we finally got around to the other side of the mountain, we decided to take this trail to the top of the mountain. And this trail was a real steep and windy trail. One where finesse had little advantage, and my skill that I developed over my life of pushing the bike really came in handy. And I made it to the top of the mountain about 15 minutes before them, and I sat there with a big smile on my face waiting for the youngsters to get their bikes to the top. And it was nice to earn back a little bit of my pride. So about that time, Scott got into high school sports and friends and stuff. We didn't see as much of him. Then he served a mission 2 years in Guatemala. And when he came back, he developed a good friendship with Uncle Jim. That's an honorary name for this guy right here who's going to be speaking to us in a minute. And he has been a very good friend of mine and an adored member of my family for as long back as I can remember. And anyway, with his friendship, the three of us started hanging out and riding motorcycles on trails and hiking. We did this for several years until Scott and I finally acquired horses once again. And you who know Scott would realize that once that happened, it was all about horses. There was no looking back. And so I remember one of the first rides we went on was a trail that I called the Cowboy Trail. And this trail connected the upper county, the inhabited part of the upper county, with the desert where the cowboys ran their trail, or their cows. And along this trail was etched in the rock a bunch of names, and they dated back to the early 1900s. And I had a good friend who was in the know about all things cowboys, and he told me that the last time anybody had rode through that trail on a horse was 1930s. And so anyway, I was intrigued by it and started spending some time trying to dog out the trail, find out exactly where it went. And I didn't even have a horse at the time, but I just thought how fun it would be to try to get a horse through there. So and this went through, this trail ran through an area called the Water Pocket Fold. And this is a series of canyons, domes, spires, and steep mesas that are pretty much all slick rock. And so, as you can imagine, it's a tough place to try to get a horse through. And I've spent a lot of years hunting that area I don't know why, but I just wanted to try to find a place, an alternate place that you could get a horse through. And I've still not been able to find a place. So it's kind of a unique trail. And anyway, the upper end of this trail is now a park trail. So we couldn't access it from the park side. They don't allow the horses on the trail, so we had to come from the bottom side. And we packed our stuff in, about halfway camp stuff, and planned to come back and spend the night. And I forewarned Scott about this trail. I said, you know, it's a long one. It's about 30 miles into. One thing I forgot to mention. So on this cowboy trail, we went clear to the park trail, and we had to. That included dropping down 1,100 feet into a big canyon. And I warned Scott, it's a long trail. It's kind of tough, and. Anyway, we ended up, because the trail is pretty rough and because we were trying to give the horses a break for whatever reason, we ended up hiking probably at least a third of it. And it turned out to be a very long day. And as the day was coming to an end, I could hear Scott mumbling behind me, and I knew he was getting tired and a little bit angry. And as we were getting back to where we'd left our camping stuff, and it was getting dark, Scott turned to me and he said, "I will never again go this far in a day, and neither will my horse." And I thought, you know, it's just like Scott. He's all tired, and he's still going to think about his horse. Anyway, I was thinking, well, you know, I've done it now. Here's our first trip out on horses, and it's going to be our last. And it was it might have been 2 weeks later that Scott called me up and he said, we need to plan another horse trip. And anyway, since then we've been on a lot of horse trips. We've had some great experiences. The thing we like to do, Scott and I, is try to find rough areas and see if we can get our horses. So we just kind of like the challenge. And over the years, Scott, Jim, and I, we have had the opportunity to ride through some beautiful country. We've taken camp trips where we've camped in the spruce along a pristine mountain meadow and ridden for days, feeling like we're the only people on the face of the planet. And probably most importantly is that we've had the opportunity to enjoy one another's company. I can remember in these latter years, Jim and I have kind of developed a tag team program, and Jim's job was to drop Scott and I off and then drive a long distance away to a predetermined camp spot. He'd set up camp, cook dinner, and then after we got through eating dinner, he would stay up and sit around the fire with Scott and visit while I went to bed. My job was to make sure the day was as grueling as possible and that we didn't make it back to camp till after dark. At least that's what Scotty claimed. just a minute to figure out where I'm at. I want to, I know this is kind of long, but I want to interject a story. This story kind of needs to be told. It's not one that I was involved in, I'm happy to admit, but this involved an experience that he had with our sister Vicki and her husband Marty. They were doing some rappelling in Zion, and Scott, I guess, Vicki and Marty had taken a course where they had learned the basics of rappelling and stuff, and I guess Scotty was taking them up to a place that he'd repelled. They rappelled through this canyon, and they thought, well, we got a little time left, so let's do another one. And so they picked this other trail, or whatever, rappelling route, and they kind of read up on it quickly, what they needed and whatnot. It said the longest rappel was like 200 feet. They had a couple of 200-foot ropes. That's the longest they had. And they thought, well, we're good. And so they headed down doing several rappels, and they got down to the big cliff at the bottom, which was the one that they needed the 200-foot rope for. And so I guess what rappellers do is they tie their ropes together. They put the knot on one side of the hook that they're going to rappel off of. And that way, and of course they get on the rope on the other side so that they can rappel down. That knot holds them in place, and when they get to the bottom, they can pull the other side of the rope and retrieve their rope. So they'd done this and threw the rope down, and I guess the first part of the drop was just like a 50-foot grade or 50% grade. And it went down a ways and then dropped over an edge, and then it was sheer cliff below. And of course they couldn't see the bottom from where they were. And so Marty was saying, are you sure the rope's at the bottom? And Scott said, oh yeah. I mean, they said that we only need a 200-foot rope, and he was certain by looking out there that their rope was long enough. And so he took off rappelling down, and once he got over the edge and on the sheer cliff, he looked down and realized that the rope didn't make it to the bottom. It was a long ways from the bottom. And so he started yelling to Vicki and Marty to explain his situation. And I guess there were so many cliffs there and stuff that the echoing was so bad they couldn't tell what he was saying. And so Marty rappelled down to see what he was saying. He explained what was going on. And Marty asked him if there was some place that he could hook on somewhere so that he could release the rope, so that they could untie the knot in the hook above and pull the rope through and retie the knot, so that Marty could get on the other end and with his harness kind of slowly let the rope out and lower Scott down. Well, Scott found a place. There was a little ledge, I guess. And the way my sister described it, Scotty was standing basically with his toes on this ledge, and somebody had put a couple of bolts there. He was able to hold on to those, and they unhooked his rope on this sheer cliff and retied the knot. And so then Marty gets down there ways, and he's letting rope out, trying to get Scott to the bottom, and he sees the end of the other side of the rope coming up and realizes he's not going to have enough room, or figures he's not, to get Scott to the bottom. So he kind of ties that rope off and starts climbing this 50% grade. And I guess it's kind of a tough grade, but he was kind of digging his toes in and his fingers, and with the weights of Scott on the other side, he was able to climb. He got up there a ways, and then he hit this place that was too slick. He couldn't get traction anymore. So the nice thing is, he was saying for him is he was able to reach up and grab Scott's rope, because if Scott reached the bottom and just unhooked, he's got nothing holding him. And so anyway, he'd been able to hold Scott's rope, and so if something happened, he could hold himself there. And anyway, when he hit this slick spot, he realized the only way he's going to be able to let Scott on down is if he swings out away from that rope and to a place over the side where there were some handholds. So anyway, he did that and kind of put his life on the line for a minute. and then climbed up and got around the slick spot and came back. And he said when he got to about within 15 feet of the top, he felt the some slack on the other side and realized Scott is down. And Scott climbed down. After he got down, there was a steep part. He climbed out far enough that they could see him. He showed him that he was okay. And about this time, a couple of park rangers showed up, and they were all concerned, wanted to know if there was somebody dead. And Scott said no, and they said, I guess they were pretty surprised. They said, we've never heard that kind of yelling and commotion and someone not be dead. And so anyway, Vicki did say that she felt like she was going to lose them both on that day. So it was a pretty hairy experience. But anyway, Scott then explained the situation. They wanted to get search and rescue to come down from the top. The park rangers did. He talked them out of it and got a rope from the 600 feet, took it back up. They pulled it up and were able to rappel down and all made it safe. Some of you may remember a radio broadcaster by the name of Chris Dobbs. He had a short spiel on national radio that he called Focus on the Family. And I was listening to it one day, and he was telling a story of how he'd taken his daughter, he had moved her to college. And after he'd dropped her off and was leaving, he just had a breakdown and started sobbing. And then he said, that this emotional breakdown just really took him by surprise. He said that he and his daughter had not been getting along well for a few years now. And lately things had kind of gotten worse, more disagreements. And they both realized that it was time for her to be out of the home. And so he was pondering, trying to figure out why he'd had this breakdown, this emotional breakdown. And he said he finally figured it wasn't her leaving home that had caused that, but what it signified, which was the end of an era for him. Scott's death is the end of a very important era for me. I'm going to miss a lot of things about our outings. I'm going to miss hearing him tell about his family. He was very proud of his family. He loved them a lot, and we got to hear about it on every trip, I think. Scott was a very kind person, very generous. He was willing to do about anything for you, and I'm going to miss that part of Scott. Also, I'm going to miss his texts and his phone calls. He would text or call me fairly regular, at least at times, to tell me about a new horse he'd bought, or a colt one of his mares had, or a horse he was breaking for somebody else, or just to tell me what a good job he'd done at setting the new set of shoes on one of his horses. But mostly, the thing I'm going to miss most is his phone calls to say, we need, excuse me, we need to plan another horse trip. Scott was the drive and motivation behind our trips. And without him, I don't know if those trips will ever happen again, or if there would even be any reason to have those trips. I love you, Scott. You will be missed.
Jared, I think the best part of some of those stories is the statute of limitations is ran, so we don't have to worry about that stuff anymore. Scott was an individual, based on everybody that's here, obviously left a mark on our hearts and touched each one of our lives. If you spent more than 5 minutes with Scott, you know he was a big fan of cowboy poetry, movies, and movie quotes. There's probably a couple of admin here that can attest to kicking us off the CAD once in a while for that. So he had a quote for just about every situation and comment that was made. I first met Scott about 10 years ago when I came to work for Washington City. He picked me up on day one, and quoting Will Ferrell said, "I'm Scott, I'm kind of a big deal." I said, "Well, I'm Brady, and you have to call me Nighthawk." And just like that, we were stepbrothers. For years, it wasn't very often that you'd see one of us without the other, whether it was doing karate in the garage, riding street bikes, horses, camping, or the lake trips, playing games. We did quite a bit of that stuff together. I'm sure each of you know how competitive Scott was when it came to games. I can't tell you how many times there were 3 o'clock mornings on the side of the mountain playing a game of heated Uno. Scott also had some favorite quotes, and in the words of John Wayne, "Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." Scott and I shared some of the most comical calls of my career, and definitely one of the worst. But no matter what the call, Scott always made the best of it. He had a larger-than-life personality that could light up any room, and a knack for making us laugh while he was doing it. I remember one particular call, it was a citizen assist, had absolutely nothing to do with law enforcement or law enforcement powers. Scott walked away saying, "We came, we saw, we kicked its ass," as if he was Bill Murray and we just trapped a ghost. Scott was a true friend, teaching me that laughter is definitely a powerful weapon. Like a scene from The Hangover, he had a knack for turning ordinary moments into unforgettable adventures, and we shared a lot of those together. He had a little bit of a mischievous spirit and always kept me on my toes. He taught us that life is meant to be lived to the fullest, and sometimes that means stepping out of your comfort zones and embracing the unexpected. Scott took me on one of those famous rides up the back of Red Mountain, and again on a trail that was not a trail. And my request was to recreate a photo that we had taken up there back in 2002. There was a huge gap that he took me to with a climb right after it, and I asked, "Are you serious?" He said, "Yes, I'm serious, and don't call me Shirley." As we got to the top of Snow Canyon, his comment was beautiful. Scott had an incredible ability to find the beauty and humor in everything that we did. He taught me to appreciate the little moments and find the joy in every absurdity that life throws our way. Like a lone cowboy riding into the sunset, Scott had a deep appreciation for the beauty of nature, one that I think it's obvious he shared with many of us here today. In the words of Roy Rogers, "Happy trails to you until we meet again." Our dear friend may have left this realm early, but his spirit will ride alongside us forever. For better or for worse, he reminds us to cherish every moment, to embrace our fears, and to live life to the fullest. As we say our final goodbyes, let us remember the words of John Wayne. Tomorrow hopes we have learned something from yesterday. Scott will continue to inspire us, urge us to learn from his example, and to make the most of our own journeys. I'm going to end with a little bit of his cowboy poetry. So, in the vast expanse of life's great plain, a soul so vibrant, now free from pain. With every step, he blazed a trail, leaving behind a timeless tale. I remember the times we throwed together, and a lot of things best left unsaid. I rode the trails again with you, my friend, last night while I lay in bed. We talked as though we were still in the go, reliving life's little wrecks. I thought of today, we'll lay you away. I'm ashamed to admit I cried. His spirit, like a wild Mustang, untamed, forever in our hearts. His memory ingrained. As the sun sets on his earthly ride, we'll cherish the moments we rode side by side. Though he may be gone, his spirit remains, guiding us through life's joys and pains. Rest in peace, sit down on that old saddle, put all you're doing aside. I just rode over to tell you another cowboy has died. Rest in peace, Scott. Thank you for the laughter, the joy, and the memories. You'll be forever missed, but never forgotten.
Okay, I'm Jim, but before I start, I was going to talk about this, but when Mike said that he takes Scott on this big long trail down into this giant canyon, and then Scott said, I'm never going to go with you ever again, right? He calls me after that. Mike probably knows that, but he always called me and said, I'm not going with him again. I says, me too, you know? And I don't know how many times he's just run us into the ground. But I got news for Mike. This is great, because 3 weeks ago we went on that horse ride we've been talking about. And we'll talk about that a little more in my talk. But Scotty come back the second night, and they went on, like, I guess 30 miles or plus trips both days, the first 2 days, maybe. And they came back, and Mike was, he'll never admit it, Mike was beat, tired, really. And he went to bed early, and Scott and I are talking around the fire, and Scott goes, I got to tell you something. I'm not going to lie. I finally swallowed my pride, and instead of dragging my horse the whole way, I just rode it. And so Mike drug his horse like he usually does, and Scotty rode his horse. And he says, I'm not going to lie, it feels pretty good to give him some of his own medicine. Anyway, I got to know Scott when he was just out of high school. And when we started getting to know each other, it just felt like we were long lost brothers, kind of on the same wavelength. And it was an easy conversation that we would have. He'd laugh at my jokes. That gets him halfway to my best friend, right? And then he'd get on and move along, and we just laugh, and we'd have a good time. Scott is good at everything. He can do anything athletic, and he wants to show everybody. He knows it, and he can't wait to show it. He puts on this air of modesty, but he really wants to show it. If you dare him to do it, and it's not too stupid, and it challenges it a little bit, I guarantee you he'll do it, and he'll probably succeed. But when he lived up next to me for a while, we got together almost every day in the afternoons, and we'd play games. We'd play all kinds of games, chess and ping pong, croquet and basketball and stuff like that. But it was usually chess and ping pong, chess and ping pong, chess and ping pong, over and over and over again. And we never seemed to get tired of it, and we were pretty competitive at it, although we both claimed that we won more games than the other one all the time. But I did. So one time we even tried basketball, but he'd shoot a three-pointer, and I'd miss the three-pointer, and he'd shoot a three-pointer, swish, And I'd miss the three-pointer, and it was 0 Scott and horse for Jim, right? Every time. So I made sure we were never doing that anymore. So we never did basketball after that. He could jump off ledges. He could do backflips, twists. He could land in the water upside up, I think every time. He could ride horses very skillfully, as I'll talk about in a minute. He could ride motorcycles. The guy was just amazing. And then when he started his construction company, he could do landscaping, like right off the bat. So a lot of times when he was in law enforcement, I'd go for rides with him. And these are called ride-alongs. You just go, and he'd do his law enforcement stuff. And I'd stay in the patrol car, and he would go interact with the people, and he'd turn his mic on. I could hear all the conversations that he was having. And I'm telling you, I'm very, very impressed with Scotty, the way he handled people. He was respectful, he listened carefully, he was really nice to people. He was fair, and he put a good face on law enforcement. When he was out there working, the people left, whether he gave a ticket or not, they left thinking, this is a good guy. I'd want him on my side. So I got some personality traits. These may not fall on you very good, but try and imagine Scotty saying this. Like if you would explain something to him, like go down this canyon to the end of the canyon, turn left and go about 4 miles and you'll find the road. He'd say, gotcha. you know. When Scott was in charge, he had a way of making people feel included and that they were safe in good hands. So I saw him in many difficult situations where he was cool-headed when he could have been crazy. And people looked to him for leadership. Scotty, if you were stuck somewhere and you needed help, somebody who was caring and compassionate, you'd want Scotty to come and rescue you. All right, so on our little 3-day trip, this was just a few weeks ago. I don't know if you were up, Mike, probably in bed, but I asked Scotty about, because he was really tired. I asked Scotty about how Mia, how you were doing. And Scott said, Mia's doing really good. She has good friends, and she's doing really good in school. And then I asked about you. And what he said there was, of course, he thought you were the greatest athlete that was ever born. And he go on and on about how you could play football, Max. And I know he really loved watching you play. He really loved it. And Mia and Max, he was really proud of you kids. He loves you a ton. And then Jackie, thank you for loving him. Thank you for your ongoing love and care for these 2 kids. Okay, let's go on here. I don't know if you figured it out yet or not, or you know this yet, but Scott loved horses, right? Scott could talk all day about horses, but I didn't really care very much. So he talked to Mike about horses all the time, and I just sit there and listen. Sometimes I paid attention. He would text his friends whenever he bought a new horse or sold a horse, or if a horse got caught over the fence and couldn't get off, he'd send a picture after he got it off, of course. And then whenever a horse died or a colt died, he would be calling in, and those are some of the toughest days Scott would have. He just loved those horses. Early on, Mike and Scott discovered foxtrotters. They're a type of a horse for you non-horse people, but they're the greatest horses ever, right? You know, a horse has 4 gears. It's got a walk, trot, gallop, and run, right? But not a foxtrotter. It's got a secret extra gear that goes right here, you know, and it's called a gait, all right? And we'll just call it the gait gear for us that don't pay attention to horse people very good. But the gait gear is amazing because a trot bounces the heck out of you, and a gallop goes so fast that you'll either run into a tree or into a ravine or something. Not a good idea, okay? Unless you still not a good idea, okay? But, you know, if you get it in that gait, it's smooth and easy, and it's going pretty fast, faster than a trot and slower than a gallop. And you can cover this huge amount of territory, which Scott and Mike love. Scott loves to go and go and go as fast as possible on a horse. And I always wanted to hit the brakes all the time. But anyway, the funny thing about the gait is that in order to get it in gait gear, you have to confuse the hell out of the horse. I mean, really, you have to hit the brakes and the gas at the same time in just the right amounts, right? And then it slips into that gear and it just goes, you know. So pulling on the reins and kicking the horse. I never could get it because it's not a very good gear. It pops out into the one or the other so easy, and you just have to be right on top of it and pay attention, which is not my favorite. Anyway, Scott loves the gait, loved the foxtrotters. In this last trip, before they got to camp, they had 4 or 5 miles of road well, I'm not very good at mileage, so Mike will probably correct me here, but something like that, that was pretty clear road, and they could gate those horses all evening long and into the night, into the moonlight, because Mike can't get home in the light. So they just skated along, and they were just as happy as could be. 2 days they were happy as could be coming in on that road. So that was really good for Scott. He loves that. See where we're at. Oh, Scott invented this hot ranch sauce. What did he call it?
Scott's special sauce.
Yeah, okay, Scotty's, it's special, all right. Probably a lot, if you've ever been to dinner with him, you've probably been trapped in this trap before. He says it's not very hot, right? Holy smokes, and whatever it was called, Scott's special sauce or whatever, I tried to memorize this, but this is more appropriate of a word for it. It's like fire out your nostrils and ears sauce. So I say, one and done, right? One and done. How many of you guys have fallen into that trap? Okay. All right. One time we were down in the gulch near Boulder, and Jackie and I and Mike and Scotty were riding that time, and we're going down the gulch, and there's these big old huge red sandstone ledges on both sides, and a nice creek running down through the canyon. And on the one side of the creek there's this flat spot, nice and level, and it's got grass. It's beautiful, and these mature cottonwoods scattered sparsely here and there. And I don't know how, but somehow Jackie and I got in front. Never happens, but we were in front, and we were sitting there on our horses just visiting, waiting for Mike and Scott to come along. Well, years ago, this rock had fallen down into the canyon, and it was about 30 yards away from us, and it was almost cube-shaped. And it was tall, like about this tall, somewhere in there, and only about this wide, I'd say. And if you had a helicopter bring a horse and drop it down on there, it'd look like, Ulysses S. Grant on a horse standing there on a statue, on a pedestal. Well, so we're talking along, and here comes Scott gating his horse down through the trees, and he comes right to the rock, kicks his horse Sammy in the ribs. Sammy leaps up on that rock, and Scotty, with his skill, pulled on the reins and stopped him, put the brakes on. The horse skidded right kind of out into the middle of that rock, and then stood straight up. And Scott, this is his favorite thing, right? He sticks his head up like this, and he surveys around like he's surveying the battlefield. And he looks at us, and then he looks forward, kicks the horse, jumps it off, gates it down through the trees. And that's the way I want to remember him, because he was in heaven in that moment. That's his favorite. He's on a horse. He's doing something that takes a lot of skill, and he's got an audience. So let's see. These are kind of long. Oh, we could do this. When you tell him something that really resonated with him, that he agreed with, he'd say, "I know, right?" Right? From Scott and Mike, I learned everything about horses. I didn't pay attention because I didn't really care. I loved being around Scott, and I loved being around Mike at the same time. It was so much fun, and I'm going to tell you a few things I learned from Scott. First of all, one of the horses about died on one of our trips, and come to find out, under certain circumstances, horses can eat too much grass. I mean, think about that. You see a horse in a field, there's grass, but it's true. They can. Who knew, right? I don't know the circumstances, but this one's a really good one. You know, if you tie a horse up too close, it can't move around and you might get cussed. But if you tie it too long, like more than 4 feet, it'll get its feet tangled up in the rope and you will get cussed. That's one thing I learned from Scott. Oh, here's something that I learned from all horse people, not just Scott and Mike and all cowboys, is that no matter how funny your joke is or how true it is, you can never, ever, ever make fun of a man's horse. They will not hear the joke. All they hear is that insult. And so, can you imagine the jokes I had to throw away on my trips? It's miserable, right? So, Scott was really nice. He wouldn't get mad, but Mike could get really mad. Okay, here's one more. It maybe won't land very good, but did you know that horses have frogs on the bottom of their hooves? No kidding. So I was out back with Scott. We were shoeing a horse, getting ready to go on a horse trip, and I was handing those little clipper things, you know, and the little carver stuff and whatever they are, you know. And he's telling me about this thing, and on the bottom of the hoof, there's this keratin that's really strong. It's shaped like a horseshoe. And then in the side, there's this little V kind of shaped thing. If I get it wrong, don't worry. Okay? And then there's some keratin that's kind of soft in between. You got to carve all that stuff out. It's called the frog. And if you don't, the horse could go lame, right? And of course, I don't listen very much or anything. So I didn't get. The only thing I got out of it is so horses always step on frogs, right? So I'm glad you laughed, because if you hadn't have, I'd say tough audience, but Scott laughed. He always laughed at my jokes. Look, all of us who have been touched by Scott, I think we can honor him by taking 1 or 2 of his great traits and applying it into our own lives. It can be as little as listening very careful to other people and saying, gotcha, you know, or it can be more difficult, like developing the skills to make everyone feel like they've been heard and become a good leader. So that's my challenge, is take something. Each of us have good experience with that character. We'll miss him a lot. And put that into your life, right? We've had a good friendship. I'll miss the ease of conversation between us, the way he laughed at my jokes and then just kept pushing me to make more. I'll miss ping pong, chess, the croquet, the card games. I'll miss the texts about horses and the texted pictures of beautiful landscape jobs he did with Skidster. I'll miss the horse trips and the long trots around the campfire, and I'll miss hanging out with him with his family. I'd like to end by saying Scotty will miss you sorely. And Jackie, thanks for letting me speak. Thank you.
All right, I'm Brian Jensen. I worked with Scott in the sheriff's office. When he first started working with the sheriff's office, I was on a shift and we got to work together. We ended up being like Starsky and Hutch. We were kind of inseparable. We were always kind of right there with each other. We'd always hit calls together. We'd just handle things. It was pretty cool. So for the first couple of years, we'd always bid to where we'd be on each other's shift, and it was pretty nice having him there, backing me being there to back him, and it was a good deal. After we had been doing the patrol stuff for a little bit, nights, days, whatever, we both got selected to start working with our search and rescue teams. We got an opportunity, so Scott started doing it first, and with search and rescue, you have your high angle teams, you have your swift water teams, you have your dive teams, you have your ground teams, your medical teams, you have all these elements. And so what our job was initially starting is just to kind of get in with the guys, start learning what they do, start learning the knots, start learning the skills, start doing it. I'll tell you, Scott, he was a natural with everything he did. Every single thing that we got involved with, he looked like he'd been doing it for years. And listening to the story, it sounds like he kind of has been, but. It was super cool, and I'd get in there with them, and we earned the respect of the search and rescue guys. We'd get in there with them. We'd go out on rescues. We'd help out. We'd set it into command. We did quite a bit with it, and it was a big honor to be a part of that, especially with Scott. With that, I think I touched on it. He was kind of a jack of all trades. Everything he did, he was so good at it. And so it was awesome to be with him, be a part of that with whatever he was doing. Hearing a lot of the stories before me makes me really lucky. I'm standing here today to tell you some of these stories that I had with him, because. Scott was pretty wild with some of his horseback riding stuff. I had a couple rides I did with him. One was over kind of by the north rim of the Grand Canyon. We were, and some of what you were saying makes sense now, where he jumps up on the rock and kind of shows off. We're coming along. We did a good little ride out, and we're coming back along, coming right along the edge of the Grand Canyon. Where we're at, it's a little place called Tuweep, and it's a 3,000-foot drop right down the Colorado River. So we're right along there. As we're going along, rocks and stuff were going down. You could hear them start to whistle as they'd go faster down to the water. And I think they eventually hit down there, but it was far. We're going along. And then there's this one rock that Jim was talking about going right along, that Scott just, kicks this thing, and right up on top of that rock does its little prance thing, kind of does this little thing, checking out the area, and then gets off the side. Well, man, I'm along that same trail. I'm an all right horseback rider, but, I'm not that skilled, but I was like, why not, so... I get in there. I didn't have spurs. Now, Scott did have spurs. I didn't have spurs, and I think that gave him the extra little boost. But I hit it. Got up there. Got up. My little horse's hoofs are kind of going like this and everything, Horse falls back on me. Bam! Lands right on me, and so it's right there. I'm hanging half off the Grand Canyon. Rocks are falling down in there and everything like that. Horse is on top of me. I'm like thinking, what should I do? Should I like cut the straps of the thing or something? I was trying to figure it out. And finally Scott just said, "Get out from underneath him." So I get out from under there, and the horse pops up and everything. I get back on. I eventually did make the rock. In my eyes, it was probably about 4.5, 5 foot rock, something like that. But Scott seems to think it was maybe 2-3 feet, so seemed a little bigger to me, but it was pretty cool. We actually weren't that close to the edge of the Grand Canyon, Scott would say, but it still makes for a good story, but it was fun. The other thing I always give him kind of hell about is I always thought it was funny how he raised gay horses, but come to find out he was raising gated horses. I misheard that a couple times, but I joke with him about that, and he'd threatened to smack the silly out of me. Another word he'd use, but we'll go with the silly. But had another one, similar type of deal. We were coming back from a rescue out off of Red Mountain, and I had rode out on side by sides getting out there. We had made the rescue, and we were coming back, And Scott didn't quite make it out there, but he had another horse somebody was riding, and they were getting a little saddle sore, so I swapped out, let them ride the side-by-side back, and I hopped on the horse. Well, there's one area coming back up there in Red Mountain with a similar type of thing, probably 4 or 5 foot little thing. It's not quite a rock, but it's like a little cliff, you know, so same thing. He gets in there, gives it hell, pops up, you know, like, oh man, here we go again, you know, so I did a little bit better. I gave it a little bit more getting up there, and my horse gets up there, and it was just pilling out. And there's like little, like, you know, like how rock climbers, you know, they'll put their little fingers in the little crevice and stuff. That's what the horse ended up doing, like, putting its little hooves in the little crevices. I eventually made it up there. It looked kind of cool. I did my little thing when I got up there. Looked kind of cool, you know, but he just kind of smacked his head, you know. But yeah, this, you know, I'm gonna miss Scott. You know, I love Scott, love his family. You know, this is awesome. The celebration of life deal. You know, remembering, you know, the good memories, remembering the good times, because that's the stuff you always want to, you know, look in your heart and remember. It puts a smile on your face, you know, where everybody laughs. You know, you can think, I know every one of us has one of those stories involving Scott where, you know, it puts a smile on your face, and he's always going to be there with you, you know. And so just always remember him, and thank you.
At this time, we have about 20 minutes. We would like to invite anybody that would like to share a memory or a story that they have with Scott. This is an open mic, so anybody can come up and do so. Thank you.
This is my family. This family, as soon as we moved here, became our family. Scotty was a dad to my daughter. That's my Sayla. He's the only other person that ever would say, Sayla, how you doing? I mean, he took her on as his own, and Scotty was the brother that I never had. All right? Like, I'm listening to all these stories. He was all of that and some. He had your back like no frickin' tomorrow. He had a heart of gold with grit. A sense of humor like no tomorrow. And somehow our conversations, we could have so many conversations, and ours went deep. We ended up in these deep, soulful conversations. They're priceless. He's with us in spirit. Everybody needs to know that, right? He's always going to be with us in spirit. Like I said, I love this family like they're my own, because they are my own. We've been here for 6 years, 3 doors down. It's like a lifetime to my daughter and I. Anyhow, I just want to come up and say how much I loved him. I love this family. And he was my brother. He had my back in everything. The texts that would come through, like, the memories, I'm speechless. Yeah. All right. You want to say something, Sayla? You have a funny story.
My name's Michael Allen. This poor family moved in next door to me. I'm the neighbor from hell. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints my whole life. And when I found out that they were inactive, my brain turned on, and I was determined that one of two things would happen. They would shoot me and bury me in the backyard, or they were coming back to church. Instead, what happened is I gained a son and a daughter and 2 grandkids that I just love more than peanut butter. They are just grand people. And Scott was a special kind of a guy. And because of the kind of guy I am, and I wouldn't let up, we get a chance from time to time to talk. And one day Scott says, "What is reincarnation?" And I said, well, I'm going to start this over just a little bit so I can do it right. Scott Durfey said, ask, what is reincarnation, to his old neighbor friend. I answered, well, it starts when your life comes to an end. They scrub your neck and clean your nails and comb your hair and put you in a padded box away from life's travails. Now the box in you goes into a hole that's been dug into the ground, and reincarnation starts when you're planted beneath that mound. Now, all the time the clods break down and you who is inside, and that's when you begin your transformation ride. Now all the time the grass is growing upon your rendered mound, and before too very long on that very spot a lowly flower is found. Now perchance a horse passes by and grazes on that flower that once was you but now has become your vegetative bower. Now the horse in you, Now, the flour what the horse done ate, along with other feed, goes to make bone and fat and muscle, essential to the steed. But there's a part that he can't use. And so it passes through, and there it lies upon the ground, this thing that once was you. And then perchance I passes by, and I see this on the ground. I'm going to pause and ponder at the marvelous thing I found. I'm going to think about life and death and reincarnation and such. But I'll come away concluding you haven't changed very much. I love Scott with all of my heart. I will miss him as though one of my children have gone. But I will look forward to a time, because I know in my heart, beyond doubt and beyond reason, that God lives and he's provided a place for us to go. And I will see him. And finally, he and I will go on that ride that he and I talked about so many times, but I was just far too busy. Scott, I love you. Can't wait to see you again.
My name's Ransom Jack Daniel, and I remember one time I was at their house for like a week, and me and Scott kept on like waking up a little early, and I was like, how does he does this? So then I challenged him to like a little challenge. There's nothing on the line, and he said if I woke up one time before him, then I won. And he was like, most of the time he woke up first, but then I had one last day there, and I woke up first. And R.I.P. Scott.
I'm Wally Curtis. Guess I'm another one of Scott's dads. He ran with my son, Tuscan. Tuscan and Cody were best friends. And Cody got tore up in that bike wreck, and well, him and Scotty, they took up to running. They for long they had Cody tied to a four-wheeler, taking him out on rides out in the desert. They had good times. But I remember the times that I got to spend with Tuscan and Scotty and some of my other boys out snowboarding. And somebody already said that Scotty was fearless. We like to ride out in the powder and out in places where the ski patrol wouldn't go. We'd ride past the sign, Skull and Crossbones there, you know, and that stuff. We get out to the edge of this cliff, and there'd be 3 or 4 of us lined up. Scotty'd usually be in the lead. Look down. Very scary. You go first. Then that would go down the line, and then pretty soon Scotty would hurl his body off the edge of this cliff. Down he'd go bombing through the snow. And then each one of us retards would follow. We had a lot of fun rides with him. I remember a time when these boys, I was down visiting Tuscan, and him and Scotty, and I can't remember who all was with, but we went out, they took me out paintballing. I'd never been paintballing, and I mean, yeah, that'll be fun. I get to shoot these little shits, it'll be kind of fun. We got out there on a hot day there, and well, one rule was that if somebody got the drop on you, you could say surrender, and you could walk away unscathed. Well, I popped up over this ridge there in that slick rock. Scotty's right down here below me. I'm thinking, I've got high ground. This is great. And Scotty's got the drop on me. And he's pointing up at me. He says, surrender! And I says, I accept your surrender. Well, that was a bad idea, because not 5 minutes later, sneaking around, and I got myself cornered. He came out and he just unloaded his gun. I looked like a paint truck and just painted a line over the top of me, you know. And of course he turned his gun up, so I was also bleeding all over. But we had a lot of fun with Scotty for a few years, and one other time they was out, Tuscan and Scotty, and I don't know who all, but they had their 4-wheelers out on the desert out there by Canesville. And Scotty had just bought this brand spanking new 700 Raptor. Oh, he was so proud of that. $7,200 or something, you know, stupid lot of money for a kid. And he was proud of it. Tuscan had his 450, TRX 450 or something, anyway, jacked up bike. And so they're out riding, and we went out to watch him. And I wound up being the photographer. I'd get the camera out. They're jumping off the top of this hill. They were going over 100 feet in the air, probably 12, 15 feet off the ground, you know, like this. And I'm getting some good shots of them, and pretty soon I'm out right underneath them. I'm getting the undercarriage, and I'm getting them landing down, way down country. They were just insane. Well, we decided we had to head out because we had another ride we was going to make, and so we left the boys there to play. Later that night, that afternoon, they had a bad wreck. Tuscan had climbed the face of this hill that I looked at, and it had stupid written all over it. But he made it to the top, and he hollered down to Scotty, told him how to take it. Well, Scotty was on his way up on his brand new wheeler, and he got just about to the top and started powering out, so we grabbed the gear. Of course, you know what happened. And Tuscan, he should be telling this story, but he said that he watched, and he'd see the bike, and then he'd see Scotty, and he'd see the bike, and then Scotty, and all the way down this. I mean, it's got to be a 600-foot hill that he's rolling down. But he was so proud of that new bike, he had to save it. So anyway, Tuscan jumped off his bike, raced down the hill to rescue Scotty, gather up all the pieces of this Raptor that he'd scattered for 100 yards. When he got it all together, and Scotty's okay, so Tuscan heads back up the hill. Gets up there, no 4-wheeler. It had gone off the other side, and it was in just as bad a shape as Scotty's. And so when I heard that, I thought, oh, praise God, these two boys are going to live for a while longer, because it's going to take a while to pay for the damages on these wheelers. But yeah, we loved Scotty too.
This is the first time I met Scott. So it's a little bit after I met Max. I come over to his house for the first time, and I'm like, "Oh, there's his dad. I don't know if he's nice or not. Be cautious." And then he comes up, and he's like, "Hey, Max, who's this?" And then he says, "Oh, this is Benny." And then Scott says hi to me, and I'm like, "Don't mess this up. Don't mess this up." And then it comes out like, "Hi?" And I'm like, "Oh, I messed it up." So a couple days later, I come back. I've came a couple times now, and I'm finally like, "Oh, dang, I was wrong at first. He's really nice. He's a great man." Yeah, he has peace in my heart, and I'm pretty sure he has a peace in all of our hearts.
Hi, I'm John Friedman. I was a neighbor, friend of the family. We recently moved away, but our hearts are still here with the family. And I got to say, I've only known Scott for 2 years, but hearing the stories from all the other friends and family, it's I can almost see every one of those situations going down with his general smile, his happy-go-lucky attitude, and full throttle way of going through anything. He would act first, think second. And, one of the things that he had recently done that really I still don't understand how he did it. He had this magic card trick. We would come over, be playing Phase 10, and he's got a deck of cards, and he's just going through, and he's just calling out how these cards are going to be going. The entire time he's telling a story about, the kings and the jesters and how they're going down to promiscuous locations. But, even after all that, he got his entertainment from watching other people be impressed by the things that he could do. But he would never let you know how he did it. And then just act like it was just normal, Tuesday, just go right on with the next. My wife and I have gone a couple horse rides with him, and he always let me use his saddle. He says, that's how I know I like you. I'll let you use my saddle instead of this one I'm on right here. I didn't really know the difference, but, I got to say I really appreciate him for providing us the opportunity to see the countryside and see a little bit of life through his eyes. And for that, I'll always be grateful. For little Max, going to see him at the football games and watching him come through and riding the four-wheeler through the front drive area, cutting ruts through the lawn repeatedly after we say stop doing that. Throwing rocks after I threaten to break his fingers if he keeps doing it, but never got any of those fingers. But I gotta say, watching the kids growing up, the little bit of time we've been there, it's just a special situation that I know every one of you, can feel, and it's gonna be hard to say goodbye. I don't even know if it's really set in. But, Scott, if you're looking down on us, ride hard.
I know there's probably more people want to talk. I just want to quickly say when I met Scott, I mean, it was about 17 years ago. I was a rookie cop out in Laverican, and a bunch of crazy motorcyclists come flying up the twist, and the Laverican twist, if anybody's familiar with that, but I'm this new cop and I see all these sport bikes flying up at me. I flip around, turn on my lights. By the time I catch up to these guys, they're all sitting on the side of their bikes with their helmets off, kind of waiting for the cop to catch up to them. And of course, there's Jared and Scott and a couple other guys, and they're just smiling. I'm like, man. So this is the first time I met Scott and Jared. I knew Scott through the law enforcement community. We weren't friends at the time, you know. Then I left Laverican and went to Washington City, and I was lucky enough that this guy trained me. So, I mean, 17 years ago, he's been a cop for a long time. Taught me the ropes out in Washington City, so grateful. And I mean, from there on, it was just, everybody knows, just some of the best memories of my life, and I can say that 100%. I mean, I look out and I see people that, because of Scott, that I had some of these people in my life, you know, and so many memories. I mean, we can all go on all day, but that's just what I wanted to share. I love my brother, you know, and I will miss him. So I know everybody else will. Thank you.
Try to keep it short because I've been told I'm not good at public speaking, so everybody look away. I was just a wee little boy when my parents were always hanging out with them. We'd always go out to the lake on his boat, and one time we're just sitting there, it's all calm and everything out in the middle of the lake. Boat just starts ripping around, and I sit down. What's going on? And I look over and see Scott. He's just going at it, and he goes, "Get the ducks! Get the ducks!" And just chasing around ducks just the whole time. It's probably my best memory there.
I'm Levi. I met Scott at work too, but not at Cop DirecTV. We hit it off right off the bat, and I knew Scott with horsepower, not horses, and sand and water. We were really good friends. I lived right out by Sand Hollow, and there wasn't a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday I wasn't getting a phone call from Scott. 6 in the morning. What's the water look like? Is the wind blowing? How's the water? And he'd be the one to be showing up either on my boat or his boat. One of the best memories I had with him was about 3:30 in the morning. My phone's just blowing up. Finally roll over, answer it, and it's Scott, and he goes, "It's gone." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "It's gone." "What are you talking about, dude?" And I listen, and the wind's howling like 80 miles an hour, and he goes, "It's gone." I'm like, "You're not out at the lake, are you?" He's like, "Yeah," and I'm looking at the tower of my boat on the beach. He'd sunk his access, well, the weather had sunk his access that night, and we go out early in the morning, and he turned that sour situation probably the best memory I've ever had. We were racking our brains together, calling all of our buddies, how do we get this thing off the bottom of the lake, out to the shore, and dry as fast as we can so we can get it back on the water again. I always admire Scott, his funny little cowboy poetry and smart-ass remarks that he would come up with just like that, and you'd stop and think, "Are you a grandpa or are you my age, buddy?" And I wish I could just remember half of the things he would say to me because they're impactful. And he did impact my life, and we had some of the best times at Lake Powell. I too look around this room and I see a lot of faces that are familiar, and I would have never met them if it wasn't for Scott and his ability to bring people together from all walks of life and all kinds of destinations, and I'll truly miss him. He was one of my best friends for a long time in my life. Thanks.
How you doing, Max? Like you about had one more story, okay? Scott was at our place probably about, month and a half ago. And we unloaded all of our saddles and all of the stuff we could on him. So he'd take them home. He said, oh, I got some good friends that tell me how to refurbish those things. And so when we was in the Mary's dad's shed, tack, he said, what's that? I said, what? And he said, that thing with the handles on it and the chain. I said, that's a nose ring. I've never seen one before. So how's it work? And I said, well, you stuff the top lip of the horse in that spindle there and turn it, and that horse will do what you want. And he said to me, I just love him until I get my way. And I think that's what we need to do. Love one another. Until we get our way. Thank you. Thanks for coming.
That will formally conclude our services for the evening. On the behalf of the Durfey family, we'd like to thank everybody for coming and remind you guys to check out the photo display on your way out. Thank you.